Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our special episode of Birds and Beans, Coffee Beans. I'm Dottie Head. I'm the Director of Communications for Georgia Audubon. We're glad you're joining us this morning. With me this morning is our Conservation Director, Adam Betchel, as well as Nima Etheridge, who's the Marketing Director for Café Campesino, which is a roastery down in Albany. Before we get started, I wanted to make just a couple of announcements. Next Friday, October 23rd, we're having a free Georgia Audubon Bird Stories virtual story hour. So bring your kids and you can sign up for that on our website. And a week from Sunday on October 26th, we're having our monthly meeting webinar featuring white oak conservation, talking about conserving Florida's grasshopper sparrows. That's also a free event at 3:30. And finally, Adam's going to be teaching both a Sparrow ID course, which will be a webinar followed up by an in-person field trip, and an eBird 101 course next month. And you can sign up for those on our website as well. I will post some links as soon as we get started here. And I'll remind everybody of this at the end as well, but everybody who's interested can purchase Georgia Audubon and Café Campesino's shade-grown organic coffee on the Georgia Audubon website or from Café Campesino directly. Every purchase helps the birds. Finally, if you're enjoying all this content, we hope you'll consider becoming a member or making a donation to support Georgia Audubon's work. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Conservation, Adam Betchel, to get things started. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. Thanks so much. Adam, it's all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Dottie, and good morning, everybody. Dottie wanted me to share my cool background. This is from a shade-grown coffee farm that I was actually able to visit with some Georgia Audubon members back in January before everything kind of went sideways with this year. So a little bit of glimmer, nice little memory to my last big experience in a pre-COVID world. But yeah, Nima and I are excited, and everyone at Georgia Audubon and Café Campesino, to talk to you today about birds and coffee and what shade-grown coffee is and why we advocate it so much here at Georgia Audubon. But to step back, I want to start with the birds that we have here in Georgia. These are probably some species that you're familiar with, you know, common birds in your backyard: Carolina wren, northern mockingbird, great blue heron. And we're lucky to have over 400 different species in our state, or at least that many have been found. And it's easy to kind of take possession of these birds. These are our birds. This is my Carolina wren and my mockingbird, and I want to protect them. And it's also easy to feel that same way about these birds. Ruby-throated hummingbird might be the species that engages people around birds more than anything. You know, it's always exciting to have one coming to your flowers in your front yard or at your hummingbird feeder if you put one up. And gray catbirds are common birds here in the summer, and they give their meow call or their long mimic warble that they do. So it makes sense that we think of these as our birds. But for these two in particular, and many, many more that we have here in Georgia, they actually spend most of their year and their lives away from us in Georgia and away from the eastern United States because they are migrants. So these birds are neotropic migrants. They breed throughout our state and throughout the eastern United States, and then they go down to warmer climates for the winter months. And so we have to think about this whole life cycle that these birds are undertaking and the different behaviors that they use. And so why would a bird migrate? Why would that teeny hummingbird right now be doubling its weight to fly across the Gulf of Mexico down to the Yucatan or parts of Central America? Mainly it's food, but kind of in both ways. So birds are leaving now, many of them, to go to where all the resources are. If you're a flycatcher, there aren't a lot of flying insects in Michigan in the winter, or even here in Georgia. That's why only the eastern phoebe really sticks around to try to find those bugs. Same for our hummingbirds, hard to find flowering plants throughout the wintertime. So it's not quite the temperature. Cold temperature can be problematic for some of our small songbirds and other migrants, but it's typically the resources, the food availability, and the competition for that food that's going to push these birds down to different climates. And then on the reverse, why would a bird even come back up here? There's so much food and lush resources down in parts of Latin America. Part of it is nesting locations. There's just going to be more of those up here as the birds spread out. Longer day length during our summer. Our summer might be shorter, but the days are long. And so lots of food, lots of nesting. And so it's just that balance of resources and competition and pretty much where the food is. So that's many of the reasons why our birds migrate, and a whole lot of them migrate. So this came out, I think, maybe a year or two ago, where some scientists were able to actually quantify the amount of birds that are leaving our country heading south. And right now we're just on the back end of the peak of fall migration. There are a ton of birds moving through. So your hummingbirds might be gone or near gone, and a lot of the warblers are on their way out, but the sparrows are just showing up, and of course the ducks are going to follow them. So almost 5 billion individual birds, somewhere between 4.5 and 5 billion, leave the United States to points further south each fall. And so that's happening right now. And you'll see another 3.5 billion come back. The discrepancy there, unfortunately, is the birds that are lost have become prey when they're down in Latin America and parts of the tropics. So 5 billion birds are flying over our skies right now, over the, from August or even July until November, heading down to warmer climates. And this is a really cool visualization. Hopefully it's coming through the animation for you all. I talk about this quite a bit because I think it's one of the coolest things in the bird world and ornithological world. Those white dots are weather radar stations. And the green moving from west to east, that's the rain that you're used to seeing. And those pulses of blue are massive movements of birds over those weather radar stations. So that's one way that ornithologists can determine that there are 4.7 billion birds moving southbound out of our country by using radar technology. So really cool stuff. And with this, we can do awesome things like this and show you that last night, this is real time. So this morning, you might have woke up, maybe if you did a walk with your coffee before joining us, hopefully there were a lot of birds around. There were a lot of birds moving last night, especially in the center part of our country, but up into Northwest Georgia and throughout most of the state, honestly. So that hot white means a big concentration of birds. So they're pushing down through Texas, down through Mexico or over the Gulf, and they're heading down to tropical regions. And so thinking about our birds that are heading there, one of the most popular, of course, is the wood thrush. And I'm going to use them as an example for a lot of what I'm talking about in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So the wood thrush is probably a bird you're familiar with. If not, go look it up as soon as you're done here and listen to their amazing flute-like song. And so in the graphic on the right, you can see this is throughout the calendar year. So there's a little bar showing you throughout the year. It's moving across the months. The deeper the purple, the higher the abundance of that species, according to eBird data and some climate modeling. And so you can see this is when the birds arrive in spring. And look at that vast area that they nest in. Almost the entire eastern United States has breeding wood thrushes. And then they cram into that incredibly small chunk of land in Central America, parts of 5 or 6 countries down there, Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, Honduras, all the way down. So look at that big space, and then they all cram down into that small area. So when I see that, I think about what's going on in Central America and what else is there besides the birds that we love and that we want to care about when they're far from home. And of course, the answer is delicious coffee. So this is a coffee bean from the farm that's in my background down in Costa Rica that I saw earlier today, and their roasting process on site. And then I actually cheated. That's some lattes on the right there from a different shade-grown coffee farm I went to in Guatemala 2 years ago. So coffee and birds are very tightly linked, especially when we think about where the neotropic migrants, our northern birds, are overwintering. However, as the conservation director, I need to point out that birds are in trouble. This came out about a year ago, a study from Cornell with many authors and partners that showed that around 3 billion birds have been lost in the past 50 years. Now, that doesn't mean 3 billion individuals just up and died like those birds we saw migrating south right now. It means that in 1970, it was assumed, or the best calculations we can come up with, estimates there were 10 billion individuals at any given time across our country. And now that number is down to 7 billion. So of course there's fluctuations up and down throughout the year and across years, but the trend is troubling. More or less a quarter of all of our individual birds have been lost in that time. And if you look at the wood thrush in particular on the right, they've had almost a 60% population decrease in the past 50 years. So if it is a bird you connect with, they're in trouble. And so these numbers are massive. They're hard to understand. What do I do with all that? And luckily they put together this really helpful kind of best management practices or simple actions you can take. And we at Georgia Audubon, luckily, are already doing a lot of programming on this stuff with window collisions and doing community science and keeping your cat indoors. But one thing that they specifically highlighted was drinking shade-grown coffee. And you might go, well, how do I know if my coffee is shade grown? What does that even mean? I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, as will Nima. And this is a great way to really help our birds when they're not near us. Everything else is kind of thinking about birds at home. This is when they're further away. And so coffee historically is a mid-story plant. It's supposed to grow under the cover of a nice canopy in the shade. But decades ago, it was realized that if we cut down the forest, grew the coffee in a monoculture in full sun, it could produce more quickly, and it could produce more coffee also in the short term, rather than the rustic or historic model of growing coffee. And so you can kind of see the two photos there. They might be over, generalizations, but it makes a lot of sense. You could either grow coffee in a monoculture like corn or soy or cotton that we might see down here in Georgia, or in a nice matrix and healthy, structurally diverse habitat. And so shade-grown coffee, though there are varying levels of how much shade and how rustic it might be, pretty much it's going to have that canopy cover that's going to provide more resources for our birds. This is from a particular study that the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center did, looking at a farm or a shade-grown coffee area in Peru, and it showed that on sun-grown parcels of land, they only detected 61 species of birds. In partial shade, that went up 18 species to 79, and in a bird-friendly, more rustic farm, 243 bird species. So of course, I'm talking about this through the migratory bird lens, but there's all these exciting birds down there, of course, that are benefiting, great kiss-kitties and exciting flycatchers and toucans. So it's not the same as a virgin patch of rainforest, but it's going to be a nice compromise for a working land that can be both beneficial to humans and to birds. But it's more than just a big species list. Of course, as a birder, I get excited when I see that I can go to a farm and find 200 plus species of birds. But it provides that broader ecological diversity, more insects, more plants, a healthy functioning habitat, which is something that we all value and try to highlight here at Georgia Audubon. There's going to be less erosion and less slope issues, which can be a big deal depending on the topography where the coffee is grown, because you're going to have those woody rooted plants to keep the soil intact. The birds do a fantastic job of eating bugs, including the coffee borer beetle. So there's going to be less pesticides and healthier coffee plants. The soils, there's not all this agrochemical or less of it that's going to be on the ground depleting the soils that we have there. The trees are going to soak up that carbon. They're going to be a carbon sink for all that vegetation. It's often better for the workers, which I'll leave to Nima to talk about. And, we can debate about it, but it tastes awfully delicious as well. And so before I kick it off to Nima, I want to just highlight our exciting partnership with Café Campesino. We're thinking of how we can help birds and people and our planet with our morning coffee, which I'm happily drinking right now. And our particular blend is sourced from 3 different places. And I'm just going to show you a couple cool birds that hang out there before I pass it on. And so one of the places where our beans come from, if you do purchase our particular shade-grown coffee blend, which of course I encourage you to do, but there are other fantastic options out there. One is Guatemala. And so some of the birds that have been found on shade-grown coffee farms in Guatemala include black-footed blue warbler. This photo is from just a couple weeks ago down on Jekyll Island. And indigo bunting. I actually took this photo on a vacation to Mexico 2 years ago. It wasn't on a shade-grown coffee farm, but they were down there in huge numbers, and you kind of get to see them molting into their breeding plumage, which is, I think, really cool. And of course, the painted bunting, one of the star birds of the US and of Georgia in particular. These birds and many, many more can all be found on coffee farms throughout growing regions of Guatemala. Another one of our source sites is Colombia, the most bird-rich country in the world. American redstarts are going to be down there in big numbers. These birds also overwintered throughout the Caribbean. This photo was taken on a Georgia Audubon trip to Michigan last year. Blue grosbeaks, so not really a big forested bird. They're going to maybe be on the edge or on some of the less canopy-rich coffee farms. And eastern kingbirds, another bird that's going to eat those flying insects. They're heading down to find those bugs. They're going to help the farm and the people there by eating all those flying insects. And then finally, we get some of our beans from Peru as well, another one of the most avian diverse countries in the world. And it's not just songbirds. Broad-winged hawks are down there in big numbers, one of our main migratory species of raptors that head out of the US. Red-eyed vireos in big numbers. And if you ever bird in South America, there's another bird called the chivi vireo, which almost looks identical to the red-eyed, but they're in South America, northern South America. They migrate south, and the red-eyeds fill their spots. But it's a recent split. They've been birding down there. And finally, the black and white warbler, like this one that I took to Cascade Springs in Southwest Atlanta. another common bird that's going to be on many of the coffee farms in Peru and throughout Latin America. So I could talk for hours about the dozens and dozens and dozens of migratory species that use these coffee farms, as well as the tropical gems that you think of. But I don't want to gab for too long, and so I'll share this summer tanager photo that I took in Costa Rica earlier this year, and I will stop sharing and kick it over to Nima Etheridge, who's the marketing director at Café Campesino, to talk about their process and all the great work that they are doing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. That was very exciting. I've actually been able to see an indigo bunting in Guatemala myself, and I really would love to see it here in Americas. So I'm trying to figure out how to make my yard work for that. Although there is tale that one of our good friends here in Americas helped President Carter see the indigo bunting, or sorry, the painted bunting, right? Not very far from where our roastery is. So that's kind of fun to think about that. So I've recently found David Attenborough on Instagram, as probably many of you have. And I think one of the exciting things that he's telling us now at his age, after everything that he's lived, is his new movie that he's witnessing, his witness to what he's seen on the planet. And what he's trying to communicate is that we should rewild the world, right? And there's this interesting little Instagram exchange between David Attenborough and fairly famous sort of millennials, and they're asking him questions. Why are the forests chopped down? And it was a really great reminder that he mentioned palm oil, but any commodities that we have in the world that require a lot of land usage are taking up our natural forests, as many of you know. And I think it's a really wonderful reminder for millennials and all the purchases that we make are directly impacting land and people worldwide. So with that, I want to talk to you a little bit about Café Campesino and how your purchase of coffee can impact life at origin, biodiversity at origin, rewilding at origin, and we'll jump into that really quickly. So let's see. Okay, so Café Campesino, as Adam mentioned, means coffee of the small farmer. Campesino is from the word campo, which literally means countryside, and campesino is people from the countryside. And so we got this name after our founder went to Guatemala on a Habitat for Humanity trip, 1997, and he was so inspired by the work of the small-scale farmer and how little money was getting back to the farmer that he decided to come back to Americas, which is where he's from, which is about 45 minutes north of Albany and 2.5 hours south of Atlanta. And he became an importer. And then shortly thereafter, people in Americas, his friends and family, said, hey, we want to start tasting your coffee. So that sort of pushed him into becoming a roaster. And then probably 5 or 10 years later than that, after that, we decided to open a coffee house in Americas. So again, Campo is the countryside. This is a picture from Guatemala, one of the places that the George Audubon's coffee is sourced. And then Los Campesinos, the people who are farming our coffee, the people of the countryside. And then Café, of course, is coffee, as we're all familiar with. And here you can get a sense for the various iterations that coffee has in our lives, all the way from it being a red fruit that starts on a tree to it being depulped and the fruit removed, to it being sorted and selected for quality over, you see that in the top left-hand quarter. And then ultimately down the bottom right, the brewed beverage that we have come to know and love. So what makes Café Campesino a little different from sort of your average coffee company is that I mentioned earlier, we started as an importer. And in doing so, we realized there'd be really no way for us to source hundreds and thousands of pounds of coffee from various different origins if we were doing this on our own. So what Bill, who started our company, did was find allies. And he really took the inspiration from small scale coffee farmers that he saw at Coffee Origin. He used them as inspiration on building a co-op. And so what we do now is Café Campesino is one of 23 roasteries across the United States and United States and Canada, who source collectively from small scale coffee farmers who are at origin producing and filling 40,000 pound containers. Because of the way coffee moves, small scale farmers could never really individually fill a container on their own to be able to sell internationally. So what we end up getting are these co-ops of farmers selling to co-ops of roasters. And what's really great about this, sort of a positive externality of this, this business model, is that there are a number of ways that we collectively work together, things that we can do as a group that maybe we couldn't have done as individuals. So for examples, in the farmer sense, farmers are working together, owning part of a business and being able to reinvest in their communities and create some social service structure and networks that don't generally exist in their country. So many of these co-ops have zero access to government support or funding. So it creates a type of civil society and social welfare structure for very remote communities of indigenous people that they actually get to participate and help run. And then from the fair trade coffee side, we get, again, access to different origins. We get partners to kind of bounce ideas off of. We get emotional support during times of COVID, and we get direct relationships to farmer groups around the world. So Adam kind of mentioned this earlier. This is a great illustration from a group, a nonprofit that we've worked with called Grow Ahead, that helps support a number of reforestation efforts or wilding efforts of farmer co-ops around the world. And it just kind of gives you a sense for, you know, when there are these agroforestry systems in place, all of the positive externalities that are created as a result of that. So, you know, you think these are people who are living on really 2 to 12 acres of land and working that land as well. And so that has to be their source of income. In many senses, it's their source of food security. But then also you can see like there's this biodiversity that's created. So in a very basic concept, we have, you know, the water conserved. He mentioned helping to stop erosion, but you've also got nutrients for a plot of land, of food, and then the biodiversity that's created around that. And then, you know, in addition to coffee, you could grow cardamom, you could grow cacao is another big popular economic generator for farmers. So the agroforestry model is sort of turning up as the antithesis to the slash and burn big monocropping. And we're very happy to see that. And of course, demand for fair trade coffee, shade grown coffee is what helps create these agroforestry systems. So again, we have our Georgia Audubon blend here that Adam shared with us. And he mentioned there are three different origins. So we have Peru, Colombia, and Guatemala that make up the contents of this beautiful bag. And for us, those are people at origin, co-ops, groups of people. And I just want to talk a little bit about each one of those co-ops before we jump into, we are going to do a small little brewing demonstration today. And, but before we get there, we just want to kind of talk about the folks who helped get this coffee to us. So, so CIC Pangoa, which is in Peru, it's probably one of the best run fair trade cooperatives in the world. It's been around for 40 years. It's led by a woman named Esperanza, which means hope in Spanish. And in addition to challenging gender dynamic roles and leading with empathy and changing kind of the way, you know, a lot of sort of preconceived notions of leadership should be in rural Amazon, in the rural Amazon. Esperanza has inspired her co-op members, and she's now looking towards the future and what can we do to A, have a co-op without Esperanza, and B, give back to the land and continue to keep our members engaged in the co-op and focused on how to mitigate climate change, really. So 698 members. This is one of the co-ops that we source from where the average farm size is a little bit larger. So they have about 8 acres average. And their focus as a co-op is income diversification. So they're selling cacao, in fact, Chocolado, which Georgia Audubon also partners with, that's based in Atlanta, uses cacao from CSC Pangoa for one of its chocolate bars and has won Good Food Awards with it. So that's really exciting to see. Also honey, they sell honey. One of the great things that CSC Pangoa has been able to do with money that they've earned off of their fair trade premiums is to reinvest that in educational and health funds. So there's women health initiatives that take place among members. There's also opportunities for scholarship for co-op members. And then also some planning for and payment of funeral services of co-op members. So really reinvesting in social services is important for them. Reforestation has become a big effort. So in recent years, areas that kind of butt up to different farmer groups, and you see this really well. There's a video that came out that Chocolado was a part of. I think it's called Raising the Bar, but many of these people who are living rurally are very close to lands, or even their own land the trees get slashed for some sort of economic crop of the moment. And so there's this real movement now in Pangoa to reforest their members' lands. And we helped work with that Grow Ahead nonprofit that I showed you earlier to raise money to plant trees in Pangoa. So reforestation is a big part of their goals for the coming years. And then soil regeneration, making sure the soil is healthy and alive. So Colombia is another origin source for us. And we source from a co-op named Fondo Paez. It's a smaller co-op than you saw at Pangoa. They have about 389 people. They are 100% NASA, indigenous people of the Cauca region of Colombia. And really when they started about 25, 30 years ago, their focus was on recuperating indigenous culture and agricultural knowledge. They've since in the 10 or so, 15 years or so that we've started working and sourcing from them, they've really started improving their coffee quality. They see that as a means to the end, to an end of earning more money for their region. So their members have become cuppers, professional tasters, and they're also understanding as farmers what the U.S. market wants, U.S. and Western markets want in coffee, so that they can grow it and process it in a way that they can deliver for higher money. The Fondo Paez in particular has had a little bit of a tough time during the COVID crisis because when we think about all of these co-ops, they are really logistically very remote. And Fondo Paez in particular has had trouble moving product off of the mountain and out, in some part due because of the way that they're structured for their indigenous groups. They have a little bit of autonomy in their region, just despite still being a part of the government of Colombia, but within the geographical area of Colombia. But Colombia in that particular region has had political upsets for many years, and the strength and autonomy of the co-op and the indigenous operating structure has been very beneficial and important to them. And as a result, during COVID times, they are being very protective of what comes in and out of their communities. So it's been a little bit of a struggle, but we are certain we will get Fondo Paez coffee in the future. So, And then in Guatemala, we source from 2 separate co-ops in Guatemala. One is near the border of Chiapas, Mexico, in San Marcos. It's sort of northwest Guatemala. It's called the Apecaform Cooperative. And the second one is called the Asociación Chahulense Cooperative, and that's in Quiche, Guatemala, which is sort of a little bit, it's in the highlands, it's further east and a little bit further south in San Marcos. But what you see here, just kind of in broad brushstrokes, is smaller average farm size per person, which you can imagine is, creates a smaller yield. In Apecaform's case, they have smaller numbers in their cooperative. There's only about 227 people, whereas in Chahul, there's over 1,000. They've had a large group of farmers be a part of their co-op. And, similarities between these 2 co-ops are that they have dealt with a what's called coffee leaf rust or La Roya in the past 5 or so years. And they have gone from, we measure coffee in what's called containers for export, which is about 40,000 pounds of coffee. And in the case of Chahul in 2013, they probably had about 44 containers. And then two years later, they ended up with about 13 containers. So if you can imagine to export, and that's really their sole source of income. So if you can imagine how that impacts their revenue and lives. So in both cases, how do they create a better sort of local ecosystem, more biodiversity, better soil health, new plants, to safeguard themselves against this withering of leaves that is La Roya? And it was kind of unclear when it was happening, whether or not it was windborne or how it was a fungus or how it was being spread, but it was making its way throughout Guatemala, and both Apecaform and Chahul have had trouble with it. Things are much better now. It seems to have gotten under control, but it still sort of frames everything they do. And really, I mean, I think in many cases, like the crisis is something that has framed their worlds over and over again. So, while they're trying to self-actualize with, keeping Mayan traditions alive, improve their coffee quality and remain committed to organics and train each other through educational farm plots, or restructure their organization in the case of Chahul, they still are all working to really literally survive. And now it's COVID. One bright spot that farmers will tell us that has come out of COVID is that farmers realize we're all in this together. It's not just them bearing the burden, the brunt of the burden of a crisis that's climate related, or whatever, like that's related to them. It's not just them having a crisis. We all are in a crisis together. So all of these farmers are farming shade-grown coffee, and a commitment to biodiversity and soil health and land health is foremost in their minds. And actually, a couple of co-ops that are in this group have decided to go into a pilot project that our importer cooperative coffees is doing to start measuring the amount of carbon that's sequestered in their soils from their trees and their shade trees, that they hope that one day they may be able to put on the market to sell. So that's it's called the Cool Farm Tool, and hopefully we'll talk more about that in the future. But anyway, I wanted to jump into coffee just really quickly and how we know it, the brewed form, and what might be some good tips for tasting, for creating great tasting coffee, and then also brewing great tasting coffee. So in the coffee world, we really encourage people to buy freshly roasted coffee. Whole bean coffee, we say, is good for about 3 months. But honestly, I would get, my favorite is in about a month. As soon as you start roasting coffee, these volatile organic compounds that are inside the bean itself start to run away and escape. And with that, you lose a lot of flavor compounds. So So that's why we encourage people to also grind their coffee immediately before brewing, because once you grind coffee, you start to emit those VOCs and lose some of the freshness. And so you want to do it right before you brew. And then we encourage people to purchase, small quantities often, so they're getting fresh coffee, to store it in very airtight areas. You don't need to store it in the refrigerator. That'll dry out your coffee, or it'll take on different flavors that you don't necessarily want, kind of like the way baking soda might. You want to keep it in a cool, dark environment, and don't want to really expose it to extreme temperatures. And then what we talk about is, like, when you brew, just be aware that, we'll get calls sometimes and people are like, this coffee doesn't taste right. And a lot of times the way that coffee tastes in the end isn't about the roasted product that you've gotten. It's more about how you're brewing it. So brewing variables that will affect a cup quality include the size of your grind, the temperature of your water, is your water too hot for the roast profile that you've chosen, and then your water to coffee ratio. So what we're going to do now, I've developed this recipe for the Atlanta Audubon blend, which has been very tasty. I've enjoyed it a lot. 18 grams of water at a 1 to 17 coffee to water ratio. So basically, I'm just going to pour in 18 grams for a Hario V60, like you see here on the screen, and pour 306 grams of water over it, and that gives us a 1 to 17 coffee to water ratio, which is right in the middle of what the Specialty Coffee Association really kind of suggests is a good cup of coffee. They say 1 to 15 to 1 to 20. So that's where I am. And Dottie, I don't know if you want to narrate or take over while I am.
Sure. Yeah, while you go set up your demonstration, I have a question and that I'm hoping Adam can help answer. We've had some people talk a little bit. Adam, can you speak to the difference between shade grown and bird friendly coffee and the designations there?
Yeah. So shade grown is kind of like, it's not quite the same as like natural. Shade grown can have a broad definition. And unfortunately, some people will take advantage of that title. I think you can put up a couple canopy trees and technically call your farm shade grown versus something that's a bit more rustic that has an actual forest. And so the bird friendly designation done by the Smithsonian is a fantastic program, because the quality of what you're getting, the health of the forest. Our coffee does not have that, but luckily we know through our partnership with Café Campesino, the photos she's sharing you, they have such a intense connection with the local farmers that we can vouch for those farms and how healthy they are. So bird friendly is a designation by Smithsonian, and if you're not buying Georgia Audubon coffee, or if you don't know the exact source, that's definitely another alternative that I encourage you to look at. So it's just a recognition program to ensure that your farm is meeting certain thresholds that are good for birds. And Nima and myself and others from Georgia Audubon and Café Campesino have talked about that and brought it up, but the nature of their co-op system and all the small farmers that they need to worry about is a bit of a hurdle and financially to get certified, at least to the best of my knowledge. And I'm sure if I'm wrong, Nima will correct me, but that's the difference. So shade grown is a bit broader definition. Bird friendly designation is a specific title applied to different shade grown farms that have gone through that process. A few other things I'll mention while Nima, you can see her getting her setup going. There's a eBird hotspot. So if you're into eBird at all and you want to go look at where Pangoa is in Peru, there's a spot nearby that has over 400 species that have been found in locations, including some of the most desired warblers here in the US, like Canada and cerulean. So the birding in that part of Peru is just phenomenal. Not that I've ever been personally, not yet, but you can just drool over the species list nearby. And then at one of the Guatemala locations, the San Marcos up near Chiapas, Mexico, a really cool bird there that you might not know about called the Goldman's warbler. And it's actually currently a subspecies of our yellow-rumped. So, in the eastern US, we have the myrtle yellow-rumped warblers. Out west, we have the Audubon's variety. And then there's a Central American breeding population called Goldman's. And you can tell they're related, but they're totally different. They're jet black all over, lots of bright yellow. It's another neat bird that, while not a migrant, is benefiting from the coffee, shade-grown coffee near San Marcos and other good agroforestry techniques in Northwest Guatemala. I'm happy to talk.
Nima, are you ready to? Yeah, Nima, are you ready to go? I can't, everybody can't.
Yeah,
see
so
what you're
I mean,
doing.
it's a little hard, forgive me for my technology here, but yeah, so basically I've ground the coffee. I have water that's at 199 degrees. And now what I'm doing is just pouring on top of the freshly ground 18 grams of coffee in a Hario V60, shooting for 306 grams in the end, sorry. Right, so shooting for 306 grams for a 1:17 ratio. So you can kind of see I'm sitting on top of a scale here and just watching the scale down here to make sure that I don't go over or under. And I actually spend, because I really like fresh ground coffee, but I'm too cheap to purchase a really nice bird grinder that, you can press a button. I grind my coffee by hand. And it's really not that bad when you're only brewing 17 grams of coffee. So if you're brewing 1 cup per person, that's not a bad deal. But I just want to kind of mention too about bird-friendly certification and what Adam said. I agree. I think bird-friendly certification is an excellent certification. And there are actual individual members, I know at Pangoa in Peru, who have that certification. But for us to be able to source bird-friendly certification, you kind of summarized really well what we've talked about in the past, Adam, which is it's hard to get that when you're working in a collective of people who are there are a number of farmers who would have to go through that process, who are already kind of jumping through hoops and dotting their I's and crossing their T's for organics and fair trade certifications. And then also you'd have to have the demand on the importer side. So, and not to say that I don't think we'll ever get bird-friendly certification. I just think it's a longer process than what I would like, and what we've, it's not easy.
Nima, we've had a question come in that you can probably address. Karen wants to know if there are coffee co-ops in other coffee growing regions like Africa, Southeast Asia, etc. And do they also stress shade grown coffee?
So there are definitely coffee co-ops all over the world. I would say, so an element to be certified organic is that you have to have a layer of tree canopy. You have to have shade. So whether or not there's shade grown, I don't know. I know in our particular groups that we work with, there's this huge emphasis really on what we talked about in terms of regeneration of soil, healthy soils, really to combat pests and increase yield, and to preserve their environment. So whether or not each co-op has an emphasis on shade grown, I don't know. I would look for a certified organic seal first to give you some sense of environmental responsibility, and then I would maybe just see if you can't find out more. Like coffee naturally grows best as an understory tree. The plant itself will last longer. So, from a small farmer standpoint, the investment in a tree, keeping it covered in shade canopy, and the ability to diversify their income with other different, perhaps revenue generating trees, is a real incentive to have shade grown coffee. So I don't know. I can't really speak for other folks and know for certain, but I would look for certified organic first.
Nima, I have some questions for my own personal brewing technique here. One, I have a hot water kettle, and it has 2 temperature settings. One is 190 and one is 208. I think yours is 199 or something. Would I be better to go just above or just below?
So it would depend on your coffee, honestly. Okay. And so,
Go ahead. So, I drink a lot of Georgia Audubon coffee. So.
Okay. So you could go a little bit. So Georgia Audubon is a little bit of a lighter roast. So you can go a little bit hotter and get more out of it. So darker roast coffees, if you go 205 or if you go a higher temperature, you're going to get really too much. You could potentially get too much out of the coffee. It could become bitter. You could over extract very easily, because what happens when you roast is you essentially dry out the bean, and it's easier to extract things from it. So when you have a little bit of a lighter roast coffee, you can experiment with the temperature and see what you like, but I would be hesitant to go much over 200. So anyway, so we have a cup of coffee here. It's happened. And, you can see. And I did that using the recipe that we talked about, the 1:17 ratio, but you can always play around too, depending on what you think is too strong or too weak or whatnot.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Did anybody else have any more questions? If so, please type them in the chat box. Adam, do you have any more questions for Nima, or?
Well, I have a comment and I guess another question too. The comment is, if you've always just used the, a pot and you press a button in the morning, you're pouring out pre-ground stuff, it's really not that difficult to do what Nima's doing as a non-coffee professional. Just as a consumer, I started doing this a while ago now, and it doesn't take much time, and it really is so much better coffee, in my personal opinion. The flavor. My other question for Nima is, I haven't invested in one of those fancy little water things. Very, very narrow spout. How important is that narrow spout versus something that might pour out a bit broader, or what is the benefit of that?
So the spout gives you an ability to just concentrate where you're pouring. So like if all of this stuff is really sort of chemistry and a little bit of science, right, for your morning cup. So depending on how much of that you want in your world, it is really how much to learn or care about this sort of stuff. But you get more precision with the spout, so you can more evenly wet the grounds at the same time, and not over wet and over extract a certain part of your brew bed. So if you have sort of an open spout, it's harder to get just a little bit of water in just one spot. It's kind of dumping out at one time. So, I mean, I would say just start anywhere. Grinding fresh is number one for me. So if you're doing that on a regular, just brewer, like a Mr. Coffee. That's how I started pandemic season, was with a Mr. Coffee. And then I decided I needed a little more, but yeah, like I would just start by grinding fresh and then experimenting to see. So in terms of importance,
we have somebody who joined us late, and she wants to know what type of brew you use. You used our coffee, right? And was that a pour over technique? Is that what that's called? I am not a coffee aficionado like you all. I just put it in the thing and press the button.
It's called a Haria V60. It's a conical spout. It's a conical sort of brew. Has these little ribbed edges that are meant for the water to move more kind of evenly and quickly. It's meant to to create a kind of a cleaner cup. Just because when you have hot water and coffee grounds sitting together steeping, you're going to pull up, if you do it for too long, you may pull out some bitter flavors or flavors that you don't like that weren't intended. So this is called a Haria V60, and it's a very, very straightforward. You'll find this at a lot of coffee shops or online, anywhere. Very straightforward brew method.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
One more thing, Dottie, if there's not any more questions, from a bird watching standpoint, it's really amazing if you're fortunate, once air travel is a little bit safer or international travel hopefully resumes to a new normal, to be down on a shade-grown coffee farm bird watching is really special. And the added benefit of seeing, the farm that is in my background, we saw the plants and saw the processing facility and saw the roaster and drank it all within a couple 100 feet. So it was just phenomenal. And at the same time, we had golden winged warbler and Tennessee warbler and Wilson's warbler and chestnut-sided, in addition to Orapindula and hook-billed. I mean, it's just really a fantastic birding experience. And then also another fantastic birding experience is down near Americus. So that part of the state is really exciting throughout the year. We've been lucky enough to do some birding and coffee events during migration, which is great. You can visit parts of Macon or parts, outside of Plains, Georgia. You can go to, some of the Jimmy Carter areas and bird there. In the winter, there's all sorts of rare birds south of Americus and in Albany. And then even in the summer, though it might be a bit warm, you might find that painted bunting or some Mississippi kites. So it's a great weekend trip or long day trip for those of us in Atlanta or Macon to go down and get some good coffee and bird watch and explore the historic towns that are there. So I can't recommend it enough from a bird watching.
Hopefully once COVID ends, we can do some more trips down there, do another collaborative trip down there. I've always wanted to go.
Well, we would love to have you. I'm very eager. Like I said, I want to see the painted bunting here.
Well, thanks everybody, and a special thanks to Nima and Adam for helping us out this morning with our special Birds and Brews. We will be back next week. I think next Friday we have a virtual bird walk here at 9 a.m. So check in with us, and I'm not sure where we'll be, but our leaders will be around the state somewhere. So always a good time. Again, thank you for coming. Thanks for your support of Georgia Audubon. There's some links in this video to where you can purchase our coffee. You can order directly from Café Campesino. And if you can't get it from us, if you're not located in Georgia, just look for shade room coffee in your grocery store. I know Trader Joe's has a very nice blend. You've got lots of options, all of which help the birds. So thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your Friday.
Bye, everyone.